Georgia is also trying to become the first team since 1909 to beat Texas twice in the same season. Hello and welcome in. It is December 5th, and we are just 24 hours away from kicking off what should be an outstanding conference championship weekend. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and welcome to Always College Football. If you could, you might be new here in this part of the YouTube space, or if you're here with us via the podcast, if you could, just subscribe if you're with the podcast. If you're on the YouTube channel, hit that thumbs up. Find us on the podcast. That way you can access us pretty much whenever you want. And we do tons of shows every single week. And we think we do the most comprehensive breakdowns. I don't think there's any denying that. So if you really want to have a good deep dive into a lot of these matchups, not just for this weekend, but also for the games coming up when the playoffs get going and the bowl games get going, this will be your home for postseason football. Look forward to being on the call for the game at the ACC championship game, and looking forward to being in the studio on selection day alongside some of my buddies as we find out what the top 12 will officially be. But before that, we have a whole bunch of games that we need to preview, and we're going to do that here right now. So before we dive into some individual matchups, there is just one overarching theme of the season so far. And it's unique, it's different, it's weird, it's wild. But in 2024, all four power conferences could have winners that are making their debut in that conference. Now, Texas and SMU, they both won conferences last year, but Texas won the Big 12 and SMU won the American. Now, prior to this season, there have only been one in the last 20 years, instance of a school that has won a power conference in their first season in that conference. There have been three total all time, but the first instance was back in 1953. That was when Michigan State won the Big Ten. In 1992, Florida State won their debut season in the ACC, and Virginia Tech won their debut season in the ACC in 2004. They came over from the Big East. So it's been a while, and we have them all in all four Power Four leagues. We also have one in the American because Army is seeking to win the American Athletic Conference for the very first time in their very first season. So interesting note this year, realignment has opened the doors for many teams, and it should be a very interesting weekend. So let's dive in, and we'll kick things off with a Friday night matchup that appears to be a play-in game for the college football playoff. It's the Mountain West Championship, and we'll break it down. Friday night, the Mountain West, UNLV, Boise State. Boise State is about a 4-point favorite. The total is around 58. This game will be on Friday night on Fox. I believe it starts at 8 o'clock Eastern time. Don't hold me to it. It might be 9 o'clock, but no, it's on Fox, and no, it's on Friday night. So if you're looking for it on Saturday and it already happened, I'm sorry. I did what I had to do. I told you when it was. I just didn't tell you the exact kick time. You'll figure it out. I trust you. I believe you. The Broncos are trying to win back-to-back Mountain West championships. On the other side, and we know Boise's no stranger to championships. There's a lot of trophies in that trophy case, but not so much for UNLV. They have not won an outright conference championship since they won the Big West back in 1994. This is a rematch of last year's Mountain West Championship. Boise won that game by 24 points, and that game they were about a 2.5-point favorite. So they clearly covered, and I don't think it's going to be quite as one-sided this year. Boise did beat UNLV when they played back in Week 9. It was 29-24. Questions that will determine the outcome. Number one, this should be the most obvious question in any game involving Ashton Jeanty, but question one, can UNLV contain Ashton Jeanty? Now, there hasn't been many examples of him being slowed down, bottled up. But the one team this year, well, there have been a couple that have kind of held him in check just a little bit. UNLV was one of those. They held him to a season low 3.9 yards a carry. His longest run in that game was 16 yards. So they did not really allow the big hitters that Ashton Jeanty's been known for. Even against Oregon, it was all right, 3 yards here, 4 yards here, 6 yards here, and then boom, out the gate for a 65-yard run. that's what he does. UNLV didn't allow that last time. Will it happen again? And Genty's been a workhorse now. So I am a little curious just how much tread remains on the tires. He was a little dinged up in that UNLV game, which didn't exactly help, but he's had 6 games with at least 31 carries in the back half of the season. So is the tread starting to wear just a little bit? Doesn't appear like it is, but it might be worth watching and worth monitoring if he is the touch bottled up. Question 2, if UNLV sells out against the run, can Maddox Madsen hit them with some play action? Now, Madsen's been rock solid. 21-3 touchdown interception, over 2,500 yards through the air. He's added a 200 of his own on the ground. Now, they're not really a team in Boise State that generates a ton of explosive pass plays. They're 94th right now in 20-plus yard passes. They're 121st in 30-plus yard passes. So they're not really a group that's going to just carve you up and just wear you out with chunk yardage. That's not who they are. But Maddox Madsen, in the game against UNLV, he was very efficient, 9 of 12 for 125 the last time they played. So can he keep them honest and keep UNLV's defense in check if they get too one-dimensional and trying to stop the run? Question 3, will UNLV's rushing attack create problems for Boise's defense? Now, UNLV really has 3 running backs, Jaden Thomas, Kylan James, Greg Burrell. Like, they have a bunch of guys that can do a lot of different things for them. But they also have their quarterback in Haj Malik Williams that's super dual threat, about 5 yards a carry, maybe a little more than that. And he leads the team actually with 9 rushing touchdowns. And he's accumulated more than 2,500 yards of offense this year. Remember, he was not the starter for the entirety of this season. Matthew Sluka was the starter, quit, and then Haj Malik Williams took over, and the rest is history. He's done a great job. Now, the last time out against Boise, he was pretty efficient. He ran for 145 yards and a touchdown on 13 design rushing attempts. Now, did have a couple sacks in that game. He was sacked 6 times, but he is a very efficient runner when given the opportunities. Mobile quarterbacks have given Boise a little bit of fits this year. There have been 5 different quarterbacks that have found some positive yardage of 50 yards or more against the Broncos. And then final question, question 4. If Boise can grab an early lead, can UNLV throw their way back into it? Now, Haj Malik Williams, for as good as he is as a runner, and frankly, he's made pretty good decisions too. 17-4 touchdown to interception ratio. His off-target percentage isn't great. He's around 14% off target, which is 93rd. And Boise is a team that once they get the lead, they attack. They have 45 sacks. That's second most in the FBS. So if Boise gets out to an early lead, can UNLV come back? That's also another avenue that we need to explore. Trends in the game. UNLV is 6-0 against the spread as a road underdog since the start of last season. It's the best in the FBS. And Boise State is 2-5 against the spread in conference title games since 2014. I'm taking the upset. I'm taking UNLV. I feel like they played Boise better than most the last time around. And I think having seen Genty before, having matched the physicality in the past, they'll be more equipped to do it this time around as well. I also think Haj Malik is more confident at this point of the season. I think the passing game for Boise won't be able to take the pressure off the rushing attack like it was last time. And I think UNLV pulls the outright upset and punches their ticket to the college football playoff. Now moving over to the Big 12 championship game. This game will be 12 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock local. They're in Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington to be exact. Iowa State takes on the Arizona State Sun Devils. Arizona State about a 2.5-point favorite. Total right around 51. This game will be on ABC with Joe Tessitore and Jesse Palmer and Katie George on the call. It's been 112 years since Iowa State last won a conference championship. Now, for those of you that are not great with your presidents, neither am I, but that was in the heart of the Taft administration. Would not have known that or figured that out. If you gave me 15 guesses, I probably wouldn't have gotten that one right. But the Cyclones, they won back-to-back Missouri Valley Intercollegiate Athletic Association titles in 1911 and 1912. Since that time, they have yet to win a conference championship. They did, however, make the Big 12 title game in COVID of 2020, but they fell to Oklahoma that year. And Arizona State, there's not a lot of teams in the country that have been playing better down the stretch than the Sun Devils. They have a 5-game win streak. The good news is Cyclones have a little win streak going themselves. 3-game heater of their own. Arizona State has won 17 conference championships in their program history, but the last one was in 2007. They were the co-champs of the Pac-10. That's right, the Pac-10. And they have not won an outright conference title since 1996. So history has to give here in one direction or the other, and I love it too. I love when teams are not used to this thin air and they have to play against each other for the belt. Let's go to question number 1. How the heck did this turnaround happen for Arizona State? Right? Like, how did this happen? To go from 3-9 to 10-2 with some of the same players, not a ton of the same players, but some of the same players. I mean, they had Cam Skattebo last year, but he ran for 780 yards. The quarterback last year, in the quarterback situation, because it was more than one, they went 8-14 touchdown interception ratio. So they really didn't have a whole lot of things going for them offensively last year. Now, they found a trio of playmakers this season. Sam Leavitt, yeah, he did miss a game earlier, but he has shined since transferring over from Michigan State. 21-5 in the touchdown interception ratio. That's obviously a significant step up from what the Sun Devils had at the quarterback spot last year. He also has been pretty good on the ground. He can keep you honest with his legs. He's got 350 rush yards. So he's got 2,800 total yards. And Cam Skattebo, as a result of Leavitt taking a little pressure off of him, he's elevated to the next level. There's been a bunch of additions via the portal, and Arizona State has created a culture of competitiveness and toughness. It's been a lot of fun to watch. Kenny Dillingham should be on everyone's Coach of the Year ballot. Whether he's 1, 2, or 3 doesn't necessarily matter, but he better be in one of those 3 spots. There's a lot of great candidates this year, but I'm not sure there's been a better job done by any coach in college football than Kenny Dillingham. Look, Kurt Cignetti, Deion Sanders, there's a bunch, right? A ton. Barry Odom. But I'll tell you what, man, Dillingham, he might get my vote when I turn it in here at some point in the very near future. Question number 2, how much does Jordan Tyson's injury affect Arizona State? Now, Arizona State really has 2 significant weapons that they rely heavily on. You got Cam Skattebo, who we've already talked about, and Jordan Tyson, who has been announced as out indefinitely as of Monday of this week. That duo, though, they account for 53% of the team's touches, 59% of the team's scrimmage yards, and 62% of the team's touchdowns. Now, Tyson has been targeted on more than 32% of his routes this year. That's the 5th highest target share amongst Power 4 players. He's got 1,100 yards. They are 636 more than the next closest Sun Devil, which ironically enough is Cam Skattebo. The good news is, when you look at how Iowa State has defended teams this year, they are really good in the back end defending the throw. They haven't been quite as good defending the run, which takes us to question number 3. Can Iowa State slow down Cam Skattebo? Now, Skattebo has been one of the best backs in America. 1,400 yards, thereabouts, 17 touchdowns. He's 5th among FBS backs this year with 900 plus yards after contact. He's been outstanding. Okay, this guy is really fun to watch. If you haven't seen him and this is your first opportunity, you will be delighted when you tune in. But it's not all about Cam Skattebo. I just referenced, yes, he's among the top in college football after contact, but his offensive line is a really veteran group as well. 129 combined career starts. They average 320 yards across the front. Like, this is a group that can push you off the ball. And they do a really nice job in scheming up certain runs that get him in space. Now, he's really good outside the tackles. They're going to get him out in the open field. He also is going to create a lot of opportunities through the air as well. He's the 2nd best running back in the country in terms of receiving production per game. Desmond Reed at Pitt is number 1. Skattebo is number 2. He is 4th, however, when it comes to overall receiving yards by running backs. Iowa State has not been good against the run this year. Their structure defensively invites teams to try to run the football. Iowa State has, for a long time, had some success in the front 7, but this year has not been that year. They give up about 5.5 yards a carry, and that'll be a problem against an elite running game like this. Question 4, can Iowa State's passing game attack the Sun Devils? Rocco Beck has been outstanding this year, and he does so many things for Iowa State, I might add. Now, he'll run it, he'll throw it, he'll put his shoulder down, get the hard yardage. You can tell that Rocco Becht was raised in a football household. His dad, Anthony Becht, coaches in the UFL, but also played tight end in the NFL for a really long time. You can tell it means a lot to him. He's hyper competitive. And as a result, he has Iowa State within striking distance of their first conference championship in 112 years. Beck has thrown for over 3,000 yards, hasn't thrown a ton of interceptions, but he is not afraid to take chances with the football. He's a bit of a daredevil. He's definitely a fun player to watch, a competitive player to watch, but he will take chances, and he's going to need to be opportunistic in this game because Arizona State's pretty good with their eyes defensively. He's got a great tandem of receivers. Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, they really carry the load for the Cyclones in the receiving game. They have combined to go for nearly 2,100 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns this season. In Iowa State, you probably wouldn't have guessed this. You probably would have thought, oh, well, it's Ole Miss, or it'd be one of those high-flying offenses. No, Iowa State is the only team in the FBS this season with multiple 1,000-yard receivers. Probably wouldn't have guessed that. I know I probably wouldn't have in the preseason, but now after watching them this year, it's not surprising to see both Higgins and Noel do a great job with that offense. But one thing that's going to be interesting is that I do think that red zone could be a huge factor here because Iowa State is going to be going against one of the worst red zone defenses in the country. Arizona State is 117th in defensive touchdown efficiency in the red zone. But when you look at what Arizona State has, they can score. So I think Iowa State, when they get down there, they'll be able to punch it in. But I also think Arizona State will get their points as well. And then question 5, will either team find a pass rush? Now, both defenses are pretty solid. You look at them like yards per play, points, yards per game, all this stuff. Like, they're pretty solid. They're not spectacular, but they're top 30, top 35 groups. But there is one area where they are both very human, and that's with their pass rush. Arizona State hasn't had it at all season. They're 109th in pressure generated on the opposing quarterback. It's around 30%. Iowa State is 95th in pressure applied to the opposing quarterback. They're about 31%. So in the event in which one team jumps up, there's really no reason to believe that the trailing team can't climb back in the game because they're going to have time to stand back there in the pocket and dissect the opposing defense because the pass rush just doesn't exist for either of these two teams. Trends in the game. Arizona State 7-0 as a favorite this season. That's the best record by any team in a season since 2012. Iowa State, the under is 9-1-1 in December and January games involving Iowa State since 2012. I'm actually bucking the second trend. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, and I'm taking Arizona State. I think they're the hotter team, and I'll trust the team that can run the football like Arizona State can likely run the football. Moving next to Atlanta, where we will watch the SEC championship game, the 5th-ranked Georgia Bulldogs, the 2nd-ranked Texas Longhorns, the second edition of what was one of the great college football games of the season. Texas is a narrow 2.5-point favorite. The total is around 48. This is a 4 o'clock Eastern kick on ABC. There's one instance in the AP poll era where a team defeated the same AP top 5 opponent twice in a season. That was in 1999 when Alabama beat Florida twice. They were ranked number 3 and then number 5 in the 2 games that Alabama beat them. Of course, Texas, they were in the top 5 the last time Georgia beat them. They were actually number 1. So could be a significant opportunity to make some history if Georgia can do it for a second time. Georgia is also trying to become the first team since 1909 to beat Texas twice in the same season. The team that did that back 115 years ago, that was Texas A&M. They beat the Longhorns twice. Let's get into the weeds, shall we? Number 1, can Texas run the football? We know that there has been a legit commitment from Steve Sarkisian and his offensive staff over the last several weeks to become a more balanced offensive attack. And it really came to a head last week with a 50-carry performance against Texas A&M. 50 carries against the Aggies. If you would have told me that Steve Sarkisian was going to hand it off or run the football 50 times in the game, I would have said no chance. He's a quarterback. Why would he do that? Well, he has now evolved, and this offense has evolved to becoming extremely balanced. On those 50 carries, they went for 240. Trey Wisner led the way, 186 yards on 33 carries. But you look at their last time they played against Georgia, and this is really before they made that commitment, they had 29 yards on 27 carries against Georgia the first time around. So this is a different Texas team from an identity standpoint, from a balance standpoint. And at that point, Wisner wasn't even really a featured player in this offense, but he just got 33 carries in one of the biggest games in Texas football recent history. So I would imagine he's going to get 30 carries again if the opportunity presents itself. Look, he's from DeSoto. He's been the lead back. He carried it 26 times for $158 against Kentucky. So this has been going on for a while. And in the red zone, too. The red zone is where it's going to be very, very important for them to find hard yards because they can't do what they did last time against Georgia and average 1.1 per carry. That's just not going to work. The good news is we saw last week Georgia has been a little susceptible against the run. And in particular, last week was the quarterback run. So we saw a little Arch Manning package. All right, Steve Sarkisian sends Arch Manning in, goes onto the field for 3 snaps, runs those 3 snaps, 15-yard touchdown run around the left edge, strike up the fight song, right? You think that there's probably another layer to that package? I think it's a safe assumption, right? I think, and we're going to get that layer this weekend, especially looking at some of the ineptitudes that Georgia's had defending quarterback run at times this year. Now, Georgia's defense over the last 5 games, they have given up on average 176 yards rushing a game. That's the last 5 games. Their first 6 games, they gave up about 120. Well, the last 5, 176. Even UMass ran for 226 against Georgia. Georgia Tech last week, 260 yards. Granted, 8 overtimes, but 260 yards rushing against a Kirby Smart coach defense. Doesn't sound right, does it? Doesn't compute. Can Texas do it with their new identity here in the second go-around against the Dogs? Question 2, can Texas protect? Now, this is one area where Texas, I do think they looked better last week. There is reason to be optimistic that the best is in front of this offensive line from a protection standpoint. I really believe that. But if you look at what's happened against Georgia and how things went against Georgia the first time around, the pressure that Georgia was able to apply, it was a huge problem. So naturally, it's a question that we have going into this one. In Texas, their quarterbacks have been sacked 14 times for a loss of 65 yards in the 5 games since they last played against the Georgia Bulldogs. So it's not like this was an issue that has now been completely alleviated, and it's one that we need to monitor throughout the game. Because if Texas can't protect, that's going to make things really, really interesting for Georgia's pass rush and how hard they want to attack. Question number 3, can Carson Beck carry Georgia to victory? Let's just be real. Let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room. This Georgia football team is not a team that is going to be committed to the run. They haven't been to this point. That's 12 games in. Our sample size is pretty dang significant. And I got to be honest with you, they're not a very effective run team. The last time that they played Texas, they were a little bit more effective. They had ETN. ETN now has the rib injury and hasn't been quite as effective. So they've moved a little more towards Nate Frazier, who I think's got a lot of juice, but will put the ball on the deck from time to time. So let's just be real. I don't think George is going to sit there and be super committed to the run game. Just look at their track record. Only 38% of their total yardage comes off the ground. That's 119 in college football. So not a very balanced outfit. That means a lot is going to be put on Carson Beck's shoulders. He's going to have to win this game with his arm. And if you look at Texas, like, you know who they are defensively. They're very simple. They have a bone-crushing structure that will just kill you with execution, and they'll just out-talent you. They have more players. They have better players. Now, maybe they don't have better players than Georgia, but against most teams, they have way better players. So they don't really blitz. They don't really dictate. They don't mix up and play a lot of man coverage. They don't really do a lot of things. They just want to kill you with simplicity, because if they screw it up, then shame on them. Like, make them beat us is their approach that Pete Kwiatkowski has used, and it's been super effective. They eat up the run, they get you behind the sticks, and they wear you out on the edges when you get in obvious passing downs. Now, Texas's structure does force you to win some one-on-one matchups on the outside, which leads us to our next question. Question number 4, who's going to step up at wide receiver for Georgia? And they're just not great at wide receiver. They lead the nation in drops with 36. A vast majority of their yardage comes after the catch. They're one of only 5 teams in the country that have over 2,000 yards after the catch. The most efficient passing game we've seen from Georgia this year was actually against Tennessee. Carson's QBR that night was 98. That was the highest of the season by nearly 7 points. Why was the Tennessee plan of attack so much better throwing the football? Because they leaned heavily into their tight ends in that matchup. They targeted them 13 times that night. They completed 10 for 130 and 2 touchdowns. So will they lean on Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, Ben Urosic again in this game? I would assume so. Because Arian Smith, great with the ball in his hands, not your traditional break you down receiver. Dominic Lovett, great with the ball in his hands, not your traditional well-rounded, polished receiver. These guys are catch and run guys, but they're not super polished. And against Texas, you're probably going to have to win with a little more polish than what we've seen from them at times. Question number 5. Will we see a different Quinn Ewers this time around? If you look back at the game against Georgia, it was probably the worst game of his career. It was. And I think if you even asked him, he'd probably acknowledge that. But at that point, he was banged up. He was rusty. He was coming off an injury. There was a lot of reasons for why he looked a little gun shy. There's a lot of reasons why maybe he was seeing some ghost. He took 5 sacks in the game. I think at least 3 of those 5 were on him. He threw into traffic. He made bad decisions. He got a chance to ride the Pine Pony for a couple minutes before Arch Manning went back in. And then ultimately he replaced Arch Manning. So will we see a different Quinn Ewers? I think we will. I'd be really surprised if Quinn didn't play well in this game. Now, it doesn't mean he's going to go out and lead his team to victory, but I'd be surprised if he wasn't a much better version of himself in this matchup than he was the last time around. Question number 6. The last time out was a complete turnover fest. All right, will it be again? Texas had 4 turnovers the last time they played. Georgia had 3. The Bulldogs converted on 2 short fields. They turned those 2 short fields into 14 points, and they took advantage of some special teams problems that led to some short fields. Now, Texas converted only 1 Georgia turnover into points. So if it becomes a turnover fest again, which I hope it doesn't, I hate watching games like that. If it does, though, will that favor Georgia because they were a little more opportunistic last time, paying off those sudden change opportunities? Trends in the game. Georgia's 11-5 against the spread, against top 5 teams under Kirby Smart. However, Georgia is just 3-9 against the spread this season. That's tied for the second worst among Power 4 teams. I think Texas has been a defense that has been outstanding all year, which is why the under has been 8-4 in games they've played this season. I'm taking Texas in a low-scoring game. I know it's dangerous, and I know Kirby Smart will probably call everybody out after the game in victory, but I have to go with the team that I think is more complete. And at this point, I think Texas is more balanced. I think Texas is more complete. I think Texas has an edge on defense, which is not something I often say. Moving next to the Big Ten championship game, the Penn State Nittany Lions, a 3rd-ranked team in the country, will take on the number 1 ranked Oregon Ducks. This is the 4th meeting ever between these 2 programs and the first since the 1995 Rose Bowl. Now, the last time the Nittany Lions defeated a team that was 10-0 or better in the matchup was 1987 Fiesta Bowl. That was the game against Miami. When Miami entered the game against Penn State 11-0, and they lost 14-10. We all know the record for James Franklin, but I have to reiterate it. I'm not driving it home, but it's part of the narrative. It's part of the information, and you need to know what it is. He's 1-16 all-time against AP top 5 teams. All right, cool. It's over, and it doesn't matter This is a new game. This is a new opportunity. Question number 1. Can Penn State find some explosiveness in the run game? Now, we know they have really talented backs. Nicholas Singleton, Katrin Allen are both really solid. We've known that for a very long time. But here's the problem, is that neither one have really gotten loose for some big gains this year. Katrin Allen, his long run this season is 26 yards, and he has about 4.5 yards per carry is what he's averaging. Now, down the stretch, in his last 26 carries, Katrin Allen's only had 64 yards gained. So it hasn't really been as good down the stretch. Singleton, on the other hand, he does not have a carry that has gone for over 18 yards since week 2 against Bowling Green. So that's something that needs to happen as well. So they need to find some explosiveness in the run game, because that is going to require chunk yardage. And we know that, at least at this point, I know that Penn State has struggled against top competition creating chunk yardage to the air. So hopefully they can find it on the ground, because if they can, that would put a little more pressure on the Oregon Ducks. Question number 2. Will Penn State be able to protect? Now, Penn State had a lot of challenges against Ohio State. Now, we know that Ohio State's defensive line is really good, probably the best defensive line that Penn State's seen all season. And as a result, that defensive front, they did a really good job of applying pressure and neutralizing the line of scrimmage when playing against the Nittany Lions. Now, Penn State, they also gave up some pressure to Wisconsin. They gave up some pressure to West Virginia. It's also worth noting, man, I mean, just across the board, the protection has not been super elite all season for Penn State. Now, Oregon, they have what I think many would consider to be an elite defensive front. Now, I think they're excellent. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say they're elite, but I think they're excellent. I do think their 2 defensive tackles have a chance to be elite. Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, like those guys are outstanding, like really, really good. Now, are they on the same level as an Aaron Donald or a Nick Bosa or something like that? No, not to that extreme, but they can take over the game if necessary. Question number 3, will Dillon Gabriel be the difference again? Now, Dillon Gabriel in the biggest game of the season against Ohio State, he was 23 of 34 for 341 and 2 touchdowns. He also did a pretty good job of kind of keeping things alive with his legs. He added a rushing touchdown in that game as well. It was his best performance in an Oregon Duck uniform. Now, one area of note, Oregon's been pretty patient at times in the passing game. They're going to get the ball out of Dillon Gabriel's hands quickly. They average just 6.5 air yards per target, so they're not pushing it downfield with crazy regularity. That's one of the lowest in the country. However, they're the 7th most yards after catch. They have really good weapons that can catch and run. But Dillon Gabriel against Ohio State, he was taking shot after shot after shot, or at least it felt that way compared to watching their offense most of the year. So will they ramp up the aggressiveness like they did the last time around? Question number 4. Who will win the best matchup of the game? Because to me, the best matchup in the game is Penn State's defensive ends against Oregon's offensive tackles. Now, the D-line and the pass rush, more specifically for Penn State, I think that's the best thing they do. So this is a strength against strength. And whoever wins this one might go a long way in being able to create big problems for the opposing team. So watch Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton, others that will rotate in there sporadically. They're going to be the defensive ends working against Josh Connolly and Johnny Cornelius. So this should be a really fun one to watch. I know scouts will be salivating over this matchup and watching those guys work against each other. Question number 5. Do you trust Drew Aller when he's targeting anyone other than Tyler Warren? Now, we know how good Tyler Warren is, right? Top 5 in receptions, yards, receiving touchdowns, already set a single season record for receptions and yards amongst tight ends. He's accounted for 33% of Penn State's receiving yards. He's got 81 catches for 978 yards. Now, the best option outside of Tyler Warren is Trey Wallace, who missed last week's game. Now, I expect him he's going to be ready to go, but if for whatever reason there's a setback between now and game time, that could be catastrophic. And then the biggest game of the year for Drew Aller He was just 12 of 20 for 146 and threw an interception against the Buckeyes. Now, his legs were beneficial to Penn State's offense, but he has yet to show us how he can take over the game against top-level competition. And this game will require his best. If he gives it to us, then they have a real chance of pulling off the upset. Let's go to the trends in the game. Penn State, 0-4 against the spread against teams with a winning record this year. Think about that for a second. 0-4 against the spread against teams with a winning record. They only played 4 teams with a winning record. That was my first reaction. And they're 0-4 in those games? Surprised by that. Oregon is 7-3 against the spread against top 10 teams since 2018. And then a couple friends in the desert. I found this to be a little bit interesting. They are increasing the line by 1.5 points in this game, or the quote home field is favoring Penn State in this game by about 1.5 points. It's a neutral site, but Penn State's getting a 1.5 point boost because it's about 1,750 miles closer to State College than it is to Eugene, which I don't know how that makes sense, but whatever. Neutral site still favors Penn State, I suppose. Doesn't matter. Give me Oregon. Give me the over. I think it's going to be a high-scoring affair. I think Oregon will get their points. I think Penn State might be able to move the ball against Oregon as well. Finally, in the Power Four, we'll go to the ACC Championship game. This game is 8 o'clock Eastern Time on ABC. The Clemson Tigers and the SMU Mustangs. SMU is about a 2.5 point favorite. The total somewhere in the 56 range or so. Clemson is 5-0 in conference championship games since 2017. So they've fared well in this situation in the past. And this might be the most intriguing conference championship game if you like fallout, if you like trickle-down effects. Because if Clemson wins, they're in the dance. What does that mean for SMU? Then SMU, do they bump out Alabama, who's not playing this weekend? Or does Alabama stay in front of SMU, whose resume is very comparable to that of Miami, who Bama was just in front of? But you look at the metrics, SMU is better from a defensive efficiency standpoint, some of the other metrics that they would favor. So this one with massive implications for that final spot, and obviously for what might be a first round bye in the event in which SMU wins. Just a fascinating game with tons of tentacles and tons of potential catastrophic outcomes for certain teams. SMU could have a catastrophic outcome. Bama could have a catastrophic outcome. And Clemson could have a catastrophic outcome. Why, you might ask? Well, that's because these two teams, their rosters could not be any more different. The Mustangs joined the ACC from the American. And since 2022, Rhett Lashley, that was his first year as the head coach at SMU, he has added 67 transfers. Only Louisville, who's added 71, has more. Meanwhile, since 2022, Clemson has 6 transfers. 5 are currently on the roster, but there's only 1 scholarship transfer. That's player/coach Paul Tyson, who also serves as the emergency quarterback. So in the event in which SMU beats Clemson, we'll get back to the age-old conversation. Why doesn't Clemson go into the portal? I think it's a fair debate, especially when you take into account that 85% of SMU's total starts this season come from transfers. The only FBS program in the country that has more is Texas State. Clemson has 0 starts from transfers this year. The only programs that join them in that are the academies, Army, Navy, and Air Force. Now, SMU's been on a tear. They've won 9 games in a row. They lost to BYU, but they lost by 3. That was back in week 2. So it's been a really long time, and things are starting to move in the right direction. They've gone 9-0 since that loss. Now, question 1, who will win the first quarter? Because during this 9-game win streak, SMU is outscoring opponents by an FBS 139 points in the first half. Now, the Mustangs, they're used to being out in front. They haven't trailed very much this season. They've trailed for just over 76 minutes. In 12 games, that's not very much. That's the sixth fewest minutes spent trailing this season in all of college football. They're one of 5 teams to trail in 4 or fewer games, along with Oregon, Texas, Army, and Indiana. 3 of those 4 are obviously solidly in the field of the college football playoff, and Army played the weakest schedule in college football. Now, the Tigers, they've been one of the best first quarter defenses in the country. So Clemson is giving up less than 2 points per game in the first quarter. They've also forced 7 turnovers in the opening quarter. Both are top 5 in the FBS. So who wins the first quarter? Massive question to be answered there. Question 2, do you realize how good SMU's defense is? Now, I think that most people, they visualize Rhett Lashley, they visualize SMU, and they think to themselves, this is a high-flying outfit. They score 1 million points. They're exciting. They win track meets. This is not the Sonny Dykes version of SMU. This is a team that in the last 2 years have really committed to being better on the defensive side of the football. They lead the ACC in scoring defense this year. They allow less than 20 points per game. Over the last 2 years, they've given up about 314 yards a game, and they also have 84 sacks in the last 2 seasons. That's the second most in college football. So this is a group that can not just outscore you by scoring 40 a game, they can also keep you in check defensively because they have really improved at all 3 levels on that side of the ball. Question number 3. Can Cade Klubnik and Phil Maffa be effective running the football? Now, Clemson will look to get Phil Maffa going because he's had just 97 rushing yards in his last 3 games. Now, take into account that against the Citadel, he had just 3 carries. But still a huge downtick in production when compared to the first 9 games of the year. He had 981 yards in the first 9 games and 97 in the last 3. He's gone 4 straight games without a touchdown, and that is something that is worth noting. He did leave the South Carolina game a couple times, looked a little bit banged up, so he looks like he's not at 100%. Can he give them one last full-on effort in the finale of, I guess, this version of the regular season to punch their ticket to the postseason? Now, Cade Klubnik's also been pretty good with his legs as well. He's got 19 carries that have gone for 10-plus yards. That includes 2 50-yard rushing touchdowns. And that 50-yard touchdown against Pitt was with about minute 16 left. They were trailing at the time. That won the game, and that was the latest touchdown, or the longest touchdown inside of 2 minutes for Clemson to win the game in their history. Prior to that run, by the way, they had 8 yards rushing against Pitt. That 50-yarder really changed the outcome. The tough thing is SMU is one of the best in the country against the run. They give up just 95 yards per game. That's 4th in the FBS. Question number 4. Will Clemson be able to hit some explosive plays? They've created 125 explosive plays this year. We qualify explosive plays by 10-yard runs and 20-yard passes. That's the 8th most in the FBS and the 2nd in the ACC behind Miami, who has 138 explosive plays this year. Part of the reason why is Cade Klubnik's been much better throwing the ball downfield. He's completing nearly 50% of his passes that travel downfield. That's 2nd best in the ACC. He's got 13 touchdowns on downfield throws. That's tied with Jackson Dart for the most in the FBS. It's the most in a season by a Clemson quarterback since Deshaun Watson back in 2016. So Trevor Lawrence never hit this many throws downfield, which is pretty remarkable when taking into account how good he was. Now, the thing about SMU is not only can they get after you, not only can they stop the run, but they also don't give up a lot of explosives. They give up just 63 explosive plays this year. That's the 4th fewest in the FBS, behind Indiana, Ohio State, and Texas. So SMU really, really disciplined in the back end as well. Question number 5. Will Kevin Jennings continue to be super effective against pressure? Now, Jennings has been awesome. He's been one of the best in the country. When things break down, he can keep it alive. And we know against Clemson, things have a chance to break down quite a bit. Only Shedeur Sanders and Diego Pavia from Colorado and Vanderbilt, respectively, have thrown more passing touchdowns while under duress. And Jennings he's been hit. He's been run around. He's created, and he does a really, really good job. And he knows he's going against a very aggressive defense. Clemson is one of the highest blitz rates in the country. All right, and they bring a lot of pressure. They bring a lot of heat. And they have been able to get home on several occasions. Now, they didn't get home as often as they could have last week. They had Lenora Sellers wrapped up multiple times, only before he was able to evade and extend. But Clemson has 13 sacks over the last 3 games, including 8 against Pitt on November 16th. And final question, can Clemson contain the super versatile Brashard Smith? Now, Desmond Reed, who plays for Pitt, caught 10 of 11 targets for 108 yards against Clemson a couple weeks ago. And Brashard Smith is similar with that type of approach. Like, he can beat you through the air, he can beat you on the ground, and Clemson has not been great this year against the run. They're giving up about 5.5 yards a carry. So they're going to have to be great against Brashard Smith and the rest of this rushing attack for SMU. Trends in the game. Clemson's 1-4 against the spread as an underdog since 2019. That's the worst in the FBS over that span. Clemson's also 0-4 against the spread against teams with a winning record this year. And SMU is 2-0 straight up and against the spread against ranked teams this season. I will not be picking the game, but I look forward to being on the call alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath at 8 o'clock Eastern time on ABC. Few more games we want to get to. The American Athletic Conference. Tulane is at Army. This game is also Friday night. This game will be on ABC. Thing to watch in this game, might be the shortest game. Might be the shortest game of all the conference championship games, given the way these two teams are committed to possessing the football. Army leads the country in time of possession at 36 minutes per game. Tulane is also in the top 5. Question 1, is Army actually good? They played one top 30 team, and it was Notre Dame. That game did not end well. They lost by 35 points. So that's a big question that I have. Question 2, Tulane, they have a talent advantage in the trenches. Will it come to the surface? Now, they destroyed Navy a couple weeks ago. Absolutely destroyed them. The Middies had just 100 yards rushing on 35 carries. And Tulane played really flawlessly along the line of scrimmage. They had 48 for 220 running the football. So this is a group that can really create. And Army's defense, they've been pretty good throughout the course of the season, but the last 4 games, it hasn't been quite as good. And can Tulane stop the run? They've allowed 200 yards rushing in 4 games this year. They've lost 3 of those 4. Now, against Navy, they allowed 114 yards, right? They didn't allow very much. So that'll be interesting. If they don't stop the run, they could be in trouble, but I think they will. Tulane's 9-3 against the spread this year. They cover by an average of 10-plus points. Army's 1-4 against the spread in their last 5 games after starting the year, 6-0 against the spread. I'll take Tulane in what I think will be a low-scoring game. I just don't think Army will be able to keep up. In Conference USA, you got Western Kentucky at Jacksonville State. Wait, hang on. Didn't they just play this? Yes, they played it last week. West Kentucky clinched a spot in this game. They hit a 50-yard game-winning field goal with 3 seconds left. So imagine having to get up for a game again that you played just a week ago. It should be interesting. Now, who's going to be the quarterback for Jack State is probably the big question. Tyler Huff got hurt in the 3rd quarter of last week's game, tweaked his ankle. He's a really mobile guy. Is thrown for nearly 2,000, but it's really more of the rushing attack that makes him super dangerous. He's rushed for nearly 1,213 touchdowns. So if Tyler Huff can't go and that ankle limits his mobility, it'll be Logan Smothers. The good news is they also have an excellent running back in Trey Stewart, who's really tough to bring down. He's got 20 touchdowns this season, got 1,400 yards. More than half of his yardage comes after contact. And Jack State rushes for about 260 yards a game. That's the 3rd best in the FBS. Western Kentucky, on the other hand, they give up about 210. They're 123rd against the run. That's not a good recipe for success if you're Western Kentucky, regardless of who's at quarterback for Jack State. And then the last one, Caden Veltkamp, he's done a good job taking over. He would not start the season as a starter, but since he's taken over, he's been one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the country. At Jack State, they're going to play a very defend defense. They're not going to give up the big plays. They're going to force you to kill them with 1,000 paper cuts. Most teams want to kill you with a guillotine. That's not how Jack State's defense is going to operate. So they're going to make you dink and dunk them to death, and Veltkamp might have the pace to do that, but I'm not sure it's going to happen this time around. Jack State's 8-2 against the spread as a home favorite. Is becoming an FBS team in 2023. If Huff's good to go, give me Jack State. I'd lay the points. I think they handle their business. Next up, the MAC championship. It's Ohio against Miami, Ohio. Miami, Ohio is a 2.5-point favorite. The total is about 44.5. Now, Miami, Ohio, they're trying to become the first repeat champion in the MAC since 2011 and 2012. That was when Northern Illinois was on their tear. Meanwhile, the Bobcats, I did not realize this. They had not won the MAC outright since 1968. I started thinking to myself, like, wait, hang on a second. I saw them in championship games like every single year. Well, they're 0-5 in conference championship games. So that would explain it. They haven't won in a really long time. This would be special. Miami did win in the regular season, but that score is a bit misleading. They were up 30-6 entering the fourth quarter. And then Ohio made a couple of touchdowns late, and it looked maybe a little bit better than you might have thought. Ohio total in the game had 291 yards, but they had just 74 in the first half. At that point, the Redhawks were in full control. Question 1, will Ohio be able to slow down Miami's rushing attack? We'll see. I really don't know. I think when you look at just kind of how things are going, this Miami rushing attack's pretty sporty. I also think that Miami might have some success containing Parker Navarro. Now, Parker Navarro is the quarterback for Ohio. He's accumulated over 2,800 yards on the ground and through the air. He was benched when they played earlier in the season in this matchup. So 13-22 for 88 yards and 2 interceptions. He also didn't run the ball very well, but he's been more effective as a runner as the season's gone along. And the Bobcats, they've kind of been unable to get their run game going in 2 straight games against Miami. So if both rushing attacks are limited, which QB do you depend on to kind of make the right decision? Parker Navarro's 10-10 touchdown interception ratio. Brett Gabbert, he's played football for 6 seasons. All right, he's got over 10,000 career passing yards and an 80-29 touchdown interception ratio in his career. Now, he's got 10 picks this year, but he didn't throw any in the first game, and I think he's thrown 3 in the last 2. Trends in the game, Miami, they are 11-4 against the spread as a favorite since the start of last season. That's second best in the FBS. Ohio's covered in 5 straight. That's the longest active cover streak in the FBS. Only Baylor's 6 covers in a row are longer. Give me the Redhawks, but it doesn't feel super comfortable. I do feel pretty strongly about it being a low-scoring game, though, if you're catching my drift. And then finally, last but certainly not least, it's the Sun Belt. Marshall is at Louisiana. Louisiana is about a 5.5-point favorite. The total is somewhere in the upper 50s. This is the only conference in the country where we actually have divisions still. So it's nice to have a traditional format. We have East versus West. We have Marshall against Louisiana. And because of tiebreakers, Louisiana gets the game at home. So this game will be played in Lafayette. But this will be the 3rd straight game for Marshall. Their lone conference loss was against Georgia Southern. They actually led that game 23-3 with about 7 minutes left. And the Eagles scored 2 touchdowns in the final 2 minutes and 15 seconds in the game to win it outright. Now, Louisiana, they lost 24-22 to South Alabama. They held to really 6 points through 3 quarters. But the only other blemish came at the hands of Tulane. So that's fine. I mean, Tulane is obviously a pretty good football team. So this Louisiana team has been rock solid this year. Question 1, will Marshall be able to pound the ball and avoid the mistakes? Now, they employ a running back by committee backfield with A.J. Turner kind of being the bell cow. He averaged about 8 yards a carry, but Braylon Braxton is also super effective on the ground. That's their quarterback. He's very, very good with the ball in his hands. They also don't make a lot of mistakes. Their quarterbacks overall are 25-4 touchdown interception ratio, but Braxton's thrown just 2 picks this year. Now, Marshall doesn't really beat themselves, and they've been able to take advantage and win close games as a result. Now, Louisiana, they haven't been great against the run. They've given up about 5 yards of attempt. Can Louisiana's backup quarterback, though, their backup quarterback would make it the start here, that's Chandler Fields, can he attack a great secondary? Now, Ben Woolridge, he's been out. So backup quarterback Chandler Fields now thrust in. He's been good. He's been pressing action multiple times the last few years. He started 14 games, played in several others dating back to the start of 2022. Now he'll be tasked with trying to bring home that Sun Belt title. This secondary, they got some ball hawks and they'll be super aggressive. So he'll need to be really smart in the game. Trends in the game. Marshall, 11-1 against the spread this season. That's the best in the FBS. And Louisiana, the last 5 games is a favorite. They're 4-1 against the spread. And the over is 4-1. I'll take Louisiana, even with a backup quarterback. Last week, Marshall kind of had to survive with a furious rally to get in the game. I just think they're going to be out of gas. I also kind of think the under is going to be a really good spot because I think Marshall will try to shrink the game, shorten the game by trying to pound it along the line of scrimmage. So it should be really interesting. I'm looking forward to the game. If you listened in there's not a lot of upsets being taken here. I do think UNLV will get it done, so they'll be my giant killer of the week. but there's so many narrow margins. It doesn't even feel like these are really giant killers. Like, can you really consider Georgia to be a giant killer? It just doesn't feel right saying that, if I'm going to be completely honest. So we'll take UNLV as our giant killer, considering everybody's looking at Boise as a possible first-round bye contestant. I think they lose on the Smurf turf. We'll see exactly how it goes. I fully anticipate being wrong in that evaluation. For all of us here at Always College Football, we appreciate you. Like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get the show. We appreciate all that you've done to support the show up to this point this year. We have had by far our best year ever, and the month of November has been off the charts as far as the amount of viewers, the amount of downloads, the amount of people that we've reached here in the last calendar month. So let's keep up the good work. Let's keep the momentum forging ahead and kick off the playoffs in style here in about 15 days. Conference championships decide first, though. Check back with us on Sunday. We'll have a little bit of a conference championship breakdown. We will also obviously get into the conference championship game recaps as well. So for all of us here at ACF, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.